Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Hard to imagine you're out there. Today's Torah reading is Exodus 13:17 to the end of chapter 17, Judges 4:4 to 5:31, and Matthew 14:22 to 33. We're going to be focusing on the Exodus passage today for such a time as this, as Bill was saying. Excuse me. What stood out for me in today's Torah reading is God's purpose for the Israelites and even ourselves. God wanted his people to get to know him, trust him as a caring God and Father, expect him to lead us in the best way, provide for them and us, and be there for them and us. Israel, as the oldest son or nation, walked through these purposes first and appeared to be very lax in seeing God and obeying him. If we take the time to really think about their process and our own, we will see that people have not changed very much. Our story starts with the Israelites about to leave Egypt. Chapter 13:17. When Pharaoh finally let the people go, God did not lead them along the main road that runs through Philistine territory, even though that was the shortest route to the Promised Land. God said, if the people are faced with a battle, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led them in a roundabout way through the wilderness towards the Red Sea. God sees, considers, plans a way of protection for his children. Continuing in chapter 14. Excuse me. Then the Lord gave these instructions to Moses. Order the Israelites to turn back and camp at Pi-Hahirot, between Migdol and the sea. Camp there along the shore. Then Pharaoh will think, the Israelites are confused. They are trapped in the wilderness. And once again I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will chase after you. I have planned this in order to display my glory through Pharaoh and his whole army. And this the Egyptians will know, that I am the Lord. So the Israelites camped there as they were told. God's purposes give even the enemies a chance to know him, that they might turn to him and leave their false gods. Continuing chapter 4, verse 5. When word reached the king of Egypt that the Israelites had fled, Pharaoh and his officers changed their minds. What have we done letting all those Israelite slaves get away? They asked. So Pharaoh harnessed his chariots and called up his troops, and the Egyptians caught up with the people of Israel as they camped beside the shore. As Pharaoh approached, the people of Israel looked up and panicked when they saw the Egyptians overtaking them. They cried out to the Lord, and they said to Moses, why did you bring us up here to die in the wilderness? Weren't there enough graves for us in Egypt? What have you done to us? Why did you make us leave Egypt? We said, leave us alone. Let us be slaves to the Egyptians. It's better to be a slave in Egypt than a corpse in the wilderness. God responds to them through Moses, longing for them to look to him and not their circumstances. Verse 13. Moses told the people, don't be afraid. Just stand still and watch the Lord rescue you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord himself will fight for you. Just stay calm. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Why are you still crying out to me? Tell the people to get moving. Pick up your staff and raise your hand over the sea." Then Moses raised his hand over the sea, and the Lord opened up a path through the water with a strong east wind. The wind blew all that night, turning the seabed into dry land. So the people of Israel walked through the middle of the sea on dry ground, with walls of water on each side. Then the Egyptians chased them into the middle of the sea. But just before dawn, the Lord looked down on the Egyptian army from the pillar of fire and cloud, and he threw their forces into total confusion. He twisted their chariot wheels, making their chariots difficult to drive. "Let's get out of here, away from these Israelites," the Egyptians shouted. "The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt." When all the Israelites had reached the other side, the Lord said to Moses, "Raise your hand over the sea again. Then the waters will rush back and cover the Egyptians and their chariots and charioteers." So as the sun began to rise, Moses raised his hand over the sea, and the waters rushed back into its usual place. The Egyptians tried to escape, but the Lord swept them into the sea. Then the waters returned and covered all the chariots and charioteers, the entire army of Pharaoh. All of the Egyptians who had been chasing the Israelites into the sea, not a single one survived. But the people of Israel had walked through the middle of the sea on dry ground, as the water stood up like a wall on both sides. This is how the Lord rescued Israel from the hand of the Egyptians. And the Israelites saw the bodies of the Egyptians washed up on the seashore. When the people of Israel saw the mighty power that the Lord had unleashed against the Egyptians, they were filled with awe before him, and they put their faith in the Lord and in his servant Moses. Following in chapter 15, we have a beautiful song of deliverance. We'll only read a few verses, starting at verse 1. "I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. He has hurled both horse and rider into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my song. He has given me victory. This is my God, and I will praise him, my father's God, and I will exalt him." And then lower on verse 11, "Who is like you among the gods, O Lord, glorious in holiness, awesome in splendor, performing great wonders? You raised your right hand, and the earth swallowed our enemies. With your unfailing love, you lead the people you have redeemed. In your might, you guide them to your sacred home." And it goes on for quite a ways. Look at it, chapter 15. It's beautiful. Continuing at 15:22. And so the story continues. "Then Moses led the people of Israel away from the Red Sea, and they moved out into the desert of Shur. They traveled in the desert for 3 days without finding any water. When they came to the oasis of Marah, the water was too bitter to drink. So they called the place Marah, meaning bitter. Then the people complained and turned against Moses. 'What are we going to drink?' they demanded. So Moses cried out to the Lord for help, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. Moses threw it into the water, and this made the water good to drink." Moses deals with these circumstances better than the people. He has been trained in the traumatic circumstances of the plagues in Egypt to rely on the faithfulness of God. The people, when they were there, may have just been spectators watching things and not learning as the time passed. Now the Lord had their attention. They are very thirsty. They are in the desert with flocks and herds. Now is their crisis. Now the Lord comes through for them, and they drink. Continuing from chapter 16. Then the whole community of Israel set out from there and journeyed into the wilderness of Sin, between Elim and Mount Sinai. They arrived there on the 15th day of the second month, only 1 month after leaving the land of Egypt. There too the whole community of Israel complained about Moses and Aaron. If only the Lord had killed us back in Egypt, they moaned. There we sat around pots filled with meat and ate all the bread we wanted. But now you've brought us into the wilderness to starve to death. The Lord spoke, and Moses and Aaron said to all the people of Israel, "By evening you will realize it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. In the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your complaints which are against him, not against us. What have we done that you should complain against us?" For they were just obeying the Lord. Moses added, "The Lord will give you meat to eat in the evening and bread to satisfy you in the morning, for he has heard all your complaints against him." Chapter 16:13. That evening, vast numbers of quail flew in and covered the camp. And the next morning, the area around the camp was wet with dew. When the dew evaporated, a flaky substance as fine as frost blanketed the ground. The Israelites were puzzled when they saw it. "What is it?" they asked each other. And Moses told them, "It is the food the Lord has given you to eat. These are the Lord's instructions. Each household should gather as much as it needs, about 2 quarts a person." So Israel did that. So the Israelites had plenty and were satisfied, but they did not realize it was the Lord. Remember, Moses said, "You will realize it was the Lord who brought you out of Israel." But they were not realizing that. Let's read continuing chapter 17 briefly. At the Lord's command, the whole community of Israel left the wilderness of Sin and moved from place to place. Eventually they camped at Rephidim, and there was no water there for the people to drink. So once more the people complained against Moses. "Give us water to drink," they demanded. "Quiet," Moses replied. "Why are you complaining against me? Why are you testing the Lord?" But tormented by thirst, they continued to argue with Moses. "Why did you bring us out of Egypt? Are you trying to kill us, our children, our livestock?" And Moses cried out to the Lord, "What shall I do with these people? They are ready to stone me." The Lord said to Moses, "Walk out in front of the people. Take your staff. I will stand before you on the rock of Mount Sinai. Strike the rock, and water will come gushing out. Then the people will be able to drink." In considering this period of history, we might conclude that the Israelites acted like children. As soon as the Lord is not supplying what they need, they cry. In a way, this is true. This is a time of learning and growth in faith. In another way, their trials were very real and scary. At the last place, they were dominated by thirst. They were having a genuinely hard time. But the Lord was still faithful when they called on his name. Are we going through this process too when we don't get what we expect? Paul talks about milk-fed Christians that are unable to take strong teaching. We must be careful to grow in the Lord's teaching and not remain children in the faith. At the same time, we can take courage in the Lord's patience with his children in these passages. When we are not faithful, he is still faithful. The second reading is in Judges, and it's a story of Judge Deborah and Barak. And I won't go into that. It's the same thing, Israel's failure, worshiping false gods, and being in trouble with the people around them. So let's go on to the Gospels. After slogging in the wilderness with the Israelites, I was excited to see what gospel was chosen to go along with that teaching, and it's Matthew 14:22. This is immediately after the feeding of the 5,000 people. Jesus insisted that his disciples get back into the boat and cross to the other side of the lake. He sent the people away to go home. It was already evening, and he went up the hill to pray. Night fell as he was there alone. Meanwhile, the disciples were in trouble, far away from land, for a strong wind had risen, and they were fighting heavy waves. About 3 a.m., that's hours and hours after they left, Jesus came toward them, walking on the water. When the disciples saw him walking on the water, they were terrified, and in their fear they cried out, "It's a ghost!" But Jesus spoke to them at once. "Don't be afraid. Take courage," he said. "I'm here." Then Peter called to him, "Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come to you walking on the water." "Yes, come," Jesus said. So Peter went over the side of the boat and walked on the water towards Jesus. But when he looked up and saw the strong wind and the waves, he was terrified and began to sink. "Save me, Lord," he shouted. Jesus immediately reached out and grabbed him. When they climbed back into the boat, the wind stopped. Then the disciples worshipped him. "You really are the Son of God," they said. So the lesson continues. In success, we are full of faith and praise, but in trouble, we fear and doubt. We are possibly moving into tough times ourselves. We must keep our eyes on the Lord, regardless of the circumstances. Thank you, Jesus.